Well, the Redskins may get a new lease on life, and the rest of us can breathe a little freer, too, thanks to an Asian rock group of all people. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this is your right angle on defamatory mascots, but that's not really where I want to go with this. So let's just set it up very quickly. I remember seeing a South Park episode a year ago about how anybody can use the Redskins name because it wasn't copyright protected. And I didn't have any idea what that was about. But as it turns out, there was a law written, and it's not a particularly good law. It's called the Lantham Act. It's a section better known as the Disparagement Clause. Up until then, the clause had said that the Trademark and Patent Office had the right to decline trademarks and patents for any item or graphic or whatever that were deemed to be offensive to a large number of people. So there's an Asian rock group called the Slants. And the Slants wanted to brand their name, and apparently the Slants were turned down because the Asians would be offended by this group name that the Asians had picked for themselves. And it went to the Supreme Court, and for the first time that in my memory, the decision was 8-0 in favor of the Slants, overturning this law. Of course, it should not have been on the bench when this had originally been presented to the Supreme Court. Yeah, argued. So what does all this mean? Well, first of all, it means that you now have the ability to make whatever disparaging mascot you want to, which certainly seems to me to be our freedom as Americans in the beginning. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this idea of political correctness in the sense that the left believes that anything derogatory, any kind of a name calling has to be absolutely limited. And we would be talking about this case, we'd be talking about the S word, for the Slants and all the rest of it. When in point of fact, I think that's exactly the opposite. So, Steve, let's start with you. People like the Redskins supporters have been saying, basically what they've been saying is, we venerate these people. This is right. This is our team. We venerate them. I certainly never would have heard of the Seminoles if it hadn't been for that filthy institution up in the Panhandle. But seriously, you don't celebrate something that you despise. And so, just specifically with the Redskins, I think it's good news for American freedom. But do you think people are really offended by this term Redskin, regular people, or do you think they've got a case here?
Yeah, you don't name your sports teams after things you don't respect or what to use to inspire fear and awe in your opponents. That's why growing up, I didn't watch the Sunday afternoons out at Busch Stadium. I wasn't watching the St. Louis limp-wristed Pansies. It's not what you do. What's interesting to me about this case is the 180 that the left has done over the past 35, 40 years. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a girl punk band called the Slits. And cultural conservatives probably got, a punk band with a derogatory female name, we can't have that. And of course, for punk rock, it was all about showing it to the man and, left-wing anarchy and all that. And so they named their band that. And there were no lawsuits. There was no, we have to have a law or any of that. It was, here's this all-girl punk band. This is their name. You can buy their records or not buy their records, and that's really all there was to it. They faded into pretty much obscurity because even for punk, their music wasn't all that great. But now here we are in the 21st century, and it's mostly people on the right, and a majority of the Supreme Court, and even the New York Times editorial board, who finally came around to say, you know what, maybe this First Amendment means what it says, and it is the progressive left and their fascist tendencies who have to squash out anything, not because they actually think it's offensive to somebody, but because it's just another means of eroding the First Amendment and imposing control on this once free and mighty people.
Scotty, the outrage machine is what drives the left. I've said a few times that natural outrage in America probably peaked in the 60s, early 60s, and they've had to manufacture synthetic outrage since then in order to keep up with supply. And this business of white liberals marching around telling everybody how offensive this is to Indians, when in point of fact, I don't hear too much from American Indians about this. And I say Indians because apparently that's a term that Indians like to call themselves by. So in any event, I want to talk briefly about this mascot thing. When you demonize a word, when you absolutely put so much energy into it, it becomes more and more powerful. But gay people many years ago decided they were going to own the term queer. They're just going to own it. It used to be a derogatory, oh, he's a queer. Okay, so we're queer. It's queer nation, queer theory, queer everything. They're proud of it now. And since they've owned it, the word doesn't have any power anymore. It doesn't have any defamatory power. So speaking of mascots and speaking of owning things and speaking of lowering the pressure rather than raising them, I'm interested in the Notre Dame mascot. It's the only Irish Catholic school in the nation of national, playing on the national level in college football. And the mascot for these Irish Catholics is the Fighting Irish. And it's a tiny little guy with his fists up like this and so on. No doubt there would be people who could say we find this offensive. And no doubt I'm sure there are a few. But everybody that I know thinks it's an awesome mascot, and the Irish have a fun time with it, and they don't take it seriously, so it doesn't own them. You told a story about some experiences that I don't remember if it was your grandfather or somebody who was in World War II. Yeah, and I was wondering if you could recount that for us, because I think this goes to the heart of the issue.
Yeah, I can do that. And a couple things come to mind. Number one, the Slants, the band, explicitly used that analogy that you just used with the term queer. They specifically said, we're calling ourselves the Slants to sort of embrace that term that's been used in a derogatory fashion. And I wonder why my favorite band from high school never got a hard time for writing that song, Big Eyes. That was clearly some sort of, I don't know if it was a reference to people like me or to anime characters.
It's a white supremacist moment is what it was.
In any case, so they explicitly said that. The other thing is that the court was actually divided on the reasoning why. So they were actually 4-4. Justice Anthony Kennedy, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg all basically said we agree with the Slants for one reason, and then the other members of the Supreme Court said for a different reason. So the only reason I bring that up is because that means that we're not rid of this yet. It is quite possible, because the precedent is not ultimately clear as it could have been, that this kind of issue is going to continue to resurface. Jim McMaster, who was a staff sergeant in World War II, and my pop, who actually brought me up from about the age of 6, me and my 3 brothers, he fought with a group of people who were thrown together from all over the country because of the draft and because of the volunteers who came from all over the place. And those people came from, a lot of them were first, second generation Americans. They were Polish, they were Italian, they were, from various extractions. He's Scotch background, some German background and stuff like that. And they almost universally referred to each other by what would be now considered derogatory terms. He's a Mick, he's a Wop, he's a Guinea, he's a whatever. They had all these terms that they used to refer to each other. And my grandfather taught us how to sing this song called "Who Threw the Overalls in Mrs. Murphy's Chowder?" And one of the lines says, no. "It's an Irish trick, it's true, and I'll lick the Mick who threw the overalls." Anyway, that's how they referred to each other casually. And I'll tell you, Jim McMaster would have thrown himself on a grenade to save that Polak. He would have stepped in front of a machine gun to save that Wop. And they all would have done the same for each other, because they knew there were more important things in life than what we call each other. And as Bill pointed out during our Members Only episode, it's not that these terms weren't invented as derogatory terms. It's that the people realized that if you embrace them, then they lose their power. Like, Mel Brooks realized that if you mock Hitler, then Nazism and anti-Semitism has lost its power. And just from one geezer to another, thank you to the people who are willing to realize that the power of names only exists in the mind of those who are using them.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. This is a lesson that the left has learned, but they learned it in terms of destroying this country. Scott's point is exactly correct. And by the way, parenthetically, if you really don't understand this, if you don't believe him, I would just advise you to watch any episode of Band of Brothers, that remarkable series about the airborne soldiers in World War II. You'll hear them say these exact same kind of things. And the thing that's interesting about this, because I think on a personal level, this can be played out on a national level if we're a healthy country. Many times you would see in situations like this, a guy doesn't particularly like Irishmen, and some guy comes into the unit and he's just a dirty Mick. I hate that Mick Bastard, and on and on and on. Next thing you know, that Mick Bastard has basically saved your life. You've saved his life. He's done all these acts of, and then that Mick Bastard is a term that you don't stop using, but it's a term of actual great affection. Yeah. I'd do anything for that Mick Bastard. And you can see this in movies like Gran Torino and so on. It is the essence of what makes this country work. It's the operational experience of e pluribus unum. It's not a pretending that these differences don't exist. It's not a pretending that this class is above another, this race is sensitive, this other one isn't. It's not a you're more of a victim than I am. It's like we're all here together from different places, and we all bring with us our own prejudices, we all bring with us our own pride, our own everything, and we bring with us our own nicknames and our own derogatory names too. And if we're willing to let people call us by a derogatory name, and over the course of our experience with them, that becomes a term of affection, that's an indication that I've earned their respect. I haven't had the respect forced on me by some social justice warrior who doesn't know anything about anything, who's been taught by 3 generations of communists. That's not how it works here. Although that's how they're trying to get it to work. So congratulations finally to the Redskins. Congratulations to the Supreme Court for whatever reason. And a special congratulations to the Slants, who through something that really seems really quite small, naming of a rock and roll band, really not one of the mega issues of the day, except it is. Except it is. So way to go, guys. Way to stick up for your right to refer to yourselves any damn way you want to. And my respect for the Slants, and when I say the Slants, I'm speaking about the specific rock and roll band, has gone way up. And these are the 2 paths that we have, and we used to take one path and the country was happy, and now we've taken another and we're not so happy, so draw your own conclusions. Thanks very much for watching. This program, like all the others, is made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. If you'd like to be one, we certainly would be glad to have you. Just head over to BillWhittle.com and click on the big membership button. I'm Bill Whittle with Steve Green, Scott Ott. We will see you next week.
I'm going to start a Jewish oldies band and call it Rosh Hashanah.